Well, good day, my friends. It's your old pal Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? I hope you said great. Today we are just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, going to Roswell, Georgia, to visit the grave of a wrestler who, when I was a kid, every time he walked down the aisle, I would boo and I'd be angry. And now I think he was one of the greatest ever. I became friends with the man who trained him and got him into wrestling. And I haven't been out to his grave in probably 5 or 7 years. So today we're going to go out and revisit our old favorite, Ravishing Rick Rude. Daze with Jordan the Lion and you all. It begins right now. You ready to do some vlogging today? You're gonna go too, aren't you? That's right. Let's go see Rick Rude. All right, we've made it over to Green Lawn Cemetery here in Roswell. So you kind of want to head back towards the back to where this building is. And he's actually right over here. Go around. There he is. Richard Rude. And I love that he has flowers here. Last time I was here he had flowers. Every photo you find online he has flowers, so people are definitely coming out here and visiting him. His family probably. Last time there was an action figure. He does have a rosary. Rick Rude, Ravishing Rick Rude, baby. The guy's story started in St. Peter, Minnesota, where he was born. Attended the historic Robbinsdale High School, from everybody from Vern Gagne to Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, Rick Rude, Tom Zink, Barry Darso, Nikita Cole, all those guys, they all went there. It's a legendary high school that is no longer there. And Rick Rude and Kurt Hennig became lifelong friends there. Rick was always a very physical person. His body was always incredible. And so when he got out of high school, he went to college for physical education. Got a degree in physical education and then got married and started working as a bouncer and was signing up for arm wrestling competitions and was doing pretty well. Now that's where he ended up meeting my buddy Eddie Sharkey. Eddie had been a championship wrestler himself, and he was a bartender at Grandma B's in Minnesota. And Rick Rude happened to be one of the bouncers. And Eddie told me that that was the roughest bar in Minnesota at the time. And I said, was it like a biker bar? And he said, no, they tried to turn it into it, but the bouncers were so tough that they didn't let the bikers even take over. So at the time, the bouncers were people like Animal and Hawk from Legion of Doom. It was Rick Rude. It was Scott Norton. It was all those guys. And Eddie Sharkey ended up, you know, he had trained people before. He trained Bob Backlund, and these guys decided they wanted to get into wrestling. And so he decided to start training Rick Rude and the Legion of Doom guys. And he told me, he said, when Rick Rude was a bouncer, he said every night there was fights that broke out at that bar because it was a tough bar. He said when Rick hit somebody, like when he slapped him or when he punched him, he said it was like watching a watermelon explode. He said he hit him just that hard. He was maybe the toughest, hardest hitter he had ever seen. And he said when they all started, it was in a church basement where Eddie had some old pads that they threw down on the floor that the stuffing was falling out, and they would just throw these guys around the floor and teach them moves for a month. And of course, Rick Rude always had an amazing body, so all they had to do was put his picture out and somebody was willing to give him a chance in the ring, and that's what happened. He started traveling around doing Mid-South and up in Canada, doing pretty well. He was starting out as a baby face, but then kind of started creeping on to this Ravishing Rick Rude arrogant routine, and it was doing well. People, I mean, he was a heel through and through. So he ended up going to Florida Championship Wrestling, and there was where he got his first title. He ended up actually becoming tag team champions as well, so he held 2 belts at one time, and his manager at that time was a man named Percy Pringle, who we would later know in WWF as Paul Bearer. Rick was really starting to have a good career. I mean, he was getting a lot of heat in Florida. They had made him the champion, and eventually he found his way over to Texas, and he became the NWA television champion over there. And then while he was with Texas, while he was with World Class, they ended up deciding to leave the NWA. So then he became the first World Class champion and held that belt for a while. This guy, you know, a lot of people thought that because of his size and everything that he had it easy, but he didn't. He actually worked his way for several years through all of the promotions through the U.S., and it wasn't actually until 1987 when Vince McMahon Jr. was really kicking the WWF off and was promising these guys guaranteed contracts and to get them on TV that he came and lured Rick Rude away. And that's where we all, I think, as fans, discovered Rick Rude. He had a great career before, but it wasn't until he got to the WWF that he really shined. They introduced him by having him join the Heenan family, which, you know, that's the crazy thing. I always thought, you know, looking back on it, Rick Rude was a great talker. He was a really great talker, so he really didn't need a manager, but they hooked him up with Bobby Heenan, knowing that that would show the fans that he was a bad guy, and he immediately had a promotion where he was feuding with Paul Orndorff, who had left the Heenan family, and then they put him doing the greatest thing I think he ever did, which was the whole Jake Snake Roberts, Cheryl Roberts feud. See, one of the things that made Rick so hated by me as a kid is that when he would walk down the ring, he would walk down as arrogant as could be. He had Bobby Heenan, who everyone hated because he was a cheater, and you'd have this guy walk out in a robe. He'd get in the ring, he'd take his robe off as arrogant as possible. He had just the most amazing chiseled, jacked body of anybody at that time. I mean, it was like seeing the six-pack and ripped muscles and everything. It just wasn't a common occurrence, really. Not as jacked as he was. And then he had the mustache and everything. And then he would demand the microphone so that he could insult the crowd. He could tell them that they were fat sweat hogs and that the women weren't good enough for him, or he would invite the women up to touch his body and then send them back to the back to their seats and stuff. And so one night when Jake the Snake's wife was around ringside and was trying to invite her into the ring, and then she says, "No, I'm Cheryl Roberts. I'm Jake the Snake Roberts' wife." And Jake comes out and rips the pants completely off of Rick Rude. I remember watching, I think it was like Sunday Morning Wrestling, and they put a black spot over Rick Rude, his body, because Jake had literally ripped his tights off. So they said from then on that Rick Rude would wear 2 pair of tights. So they ended up having them have their feud culminate at the, I think it was Survivor Series, where he ended up dropping Jake and pinning Jake. And so then he started working with the Ultimate Warrior, and they had that amazing thing where they were having like a flex off, and Rick Rude got pissed. And apparently in real life, he really got pissed at the Warrior and hit him with that metal bar and like knocked him out and everything. So they had a promotion, and that's when Rick Rude won his first title. He won the Intercontinental belt off of the Ultimate Warrior and held that for a while, and then ended up dropping it to the Ultimate Warrior. And he had a good run. Like, he was doing house shows with Hulk Hogan. And it seems like he would have been a great contender against Hulk Hogan, but it never really hit TV. And the backstory is that people said that Hulk Hogan said that he thought Rick Rude would hurt him. Like, he didn't trust him. He said he didn't trust that. He used to call him the Tasmanian Devil. He would say, I don't want to be in the ring with the Tasmanian Devil. So Rick Rude never really got a big shot at the title or anything when Hogan was there. But eventually, where he was feuding with Hot Rod Roddy Piper, which was fun, and Jimmy Superfly Snuka. He had something with Jimmy Superfly Snuka for a while, and then Ultimate Warrior become champion, so then they started to feud again, and I kind of thought that Rick Rude should have been champion then, but they just never made him champion. And apparently the rumor that has surfaced now is that Vince McMahon apparently told Rick Rude that he wasn't big enough. Like, that he said he physically needed to be bigger, and the rumor was that he told him he needed to do steroids, and that Rick Rude thought he was big enough and strong enough as it was, and he didn't want to do them. So he left, and he went and took kind of some independent gigs for a while, and then went and did Japan. And when he came back from Japan, all of a sudden he ends up on WCW TV. As a fan, I was completely shocked to see him leave, because I always, in those days I was a young kid, you just looked at WCW as like the minor leagues in a way. But it kind of made it better, because once he got there, he started feuding with Sting, and he beat Sting for the title, and he was involved with all the creepy bad guys over in WCW for a while, and he ended up wrestling Ricky Steamboat and had some great matches, but he ended up getting hurt really bad and had to vacate the title. And then eventually, when he was well enough to come back, he eventually took the belt from Ric Flair and held the belt for a long time, and then had a career-ending injury with Sting, where Sting basically dove on him when he was outside the ring. And the weird way that the ring was set up, they had a step, and Rick Rude's back fell right where that step was, and it made it impossible for him to ever wrestle again. So he basically collected on his insurance policy with Lloyd's of London, because all the wrestlers had an insurance policy with Lloyd's of London, because you never know what can happen, and they would pretty much insure anybody, as I understand it. And he went off and kind of became a mouthpiece for Paul Heyman's Extreme Championship Wrestling at that point. Now, even though he wasn't in the ring anymore, he never let his body get out of shape, and he was always a very intruding, very intimidating person when you saw him walk to the ring or anything, because he later became kind of a bodyguard manager type figure. He left Extreme Championship Wrestling, went back to the WWE, and was a member of D-Generation X, and was kind of linked up with that whole group early on. And then the Montreal Screwjob happened, where Bret Hart was cheated out of his belt by Shawn Michaels, and it was actually Vince McMahon kind of pulled a ruse on everybody. And Rick Rude didn't like this. He liked the Hart family. He thought it was a slap in the face. And so he ended up quitting and went back to WCW and joined up with Curt Hennig there. But what was interesting was he made history when he did that, because WWE used to record Raw in advance, like a week in advance, and then they would play it the next week. And Eric Bischoff decided to put Ravishing Rick Rude on TV that Monday night at the same time that WWE would be airing Raw. And Rick Rude ended up on two different shows at the same exact time on that Monday night. And was the only member he was the first member to be a part of D-Generation X and the NWO, because once he came over back to WCW, he and Curt Hennig basically were linked up with the NWO for the rest of his career. And then their contracts basically ran out. And from what I was able to read, Rick was supposedly having some luck with, I guess, his back. He was able to, and you got to really wonder with Diamond Dallas Page now, I'll go into that. But he seemed to have been having better luck with his back. And it was rumored that he was trying to get into the field of MMA, martial arts training. And so he was training doing that kind of stuff when he ended up passing away at the untimely age of 40 years old. They said it was a heart attack, but you almost wonder if, with Diamond Dallas Page and his methods now, if he would have been able to help Rick get back in the ring. I know he would have been older and everything, but really sad. There's if you look up Rick Rude's death, there's this rumor that so many wrestlers have passed around, and they said that, kind of what they believed or what everyone had said was that Rick may have done this himself, and because he did have prescription medications in his system and by his bedside. But there you can find countless wrestlers saying that there's a rumor that, this guy, that Rick liked to do the blue pill kind of stuff. He liked to do things that would stimulate your sexuality. And apparently he injected things at one point, and it caused him to have an issue with getting erections. And so this is something that apparently, a lot of wrestlers have talked about this. I've seen Honky Tonk Man, Greg Valentine, just a lot of guys talk about where this was a rumor that people said that he was basically not able to have sex anymore. And some people said that he really took it hard, almost like it was the end of the world kind of thing. And they have, been telling this story for years that that's what happened. But I don't want to believe that, because he had kids and a wife, and his wife will be buried right here next to him. Clearly she didn't plan on remarrying or anything, and is planning on being buried right next to him. So I just can't imagine a man that, even though his gimmick was that he was a total stud to the ladies and everything, Bret the Hitman Hart said Rick wouldn't even take off his wedding ring to wrestle because he was that devout. And yeah, I don't know. I want to believe he was, that his life meant more to him than that. But that is something that you'll always see if you look him up, that people are telling that rumor. I'm just mentioning it because it's so prevalently out there, but I personally just don't buy into it. Just to tell you the kind of man that Rick Rude was, I've known two different people that were bartenders at two different places in the country back in the 80s, and they said that they were working at a Holiday Inn one night when Rick Rude was in there drinking, not bothering a soul, and they saw people come in and provoke him and try and pick fights with him. And both of them told me that either he ignored it or tried to ignore it for a while, and then the story goes that he just turned around, grabbed the guy by the throat, choked him out, and said, "Don't worry, he'll be okay in about 2 minutes." That he didn't want to hurt anybody. He didn't take advantage of being the tough guy. He didn't go out to bars. At least in his older days when he was married and had kids, he didn't go out to bars looking for fights or looking for trouble or anything. And Eddie Sharkey told me this great story where he said, I had a point where I quit training wrestlers, and I was a referee, and I was kind of down on my luck. I'd had some financial troubles, and all of a sudden one night Rick Rude shows up where I'm reffing a match, and he shows up with a briefcase full of money and gave it to me. It was like $1,000 or something. He said, at the time, I literally cried. He said, I needed money so bad. And he just said, I heard you were having some tough times. I felt like I owed you something. So, pretty stand-up guy. Even though I was not a fan as a kid, I am a huge fan as an adult. Thank you for everything you've done for wrestling, Rick Rude. Now, maybe his children are going to be buried in these two spots above. I don't know. I know he had 3 children, but he and his wife are right here. And if you turn around right over here, you don't want to miss that somebody has brought a WWF belt, or WWE belt actually, but we know the sentiment. And even though it's kind of getting pushed, this bench says, "Our loving daddy, Rick Rude." been 5 years since I visited you, but you're never forgotten. In fact, Rick, you're probably as famous now or as popular now as you were when you were alive, because your era of WWE/WWF wrestling is probably the most popular of all time. So anybody that was a superstar during that time is legendary, and you are a Hall of Famer. Rest in peace, my man.